Uh, well, I think cool is just a relative term. You know, it doesn't have to go with the latest and greatest bands and the latest and greatest haircuts or clothes. You know, I think once you find your persona and you find what you think is cool, that's good for life. You know. Otherwise, to me, it's just I see people jumping around from different thing to different thing. You know, and I go, oh man, you know, that's not cool. Well, I mean, I feel like I'm growing by doing this big band that I've got. It's not really a jumping around thing for me, and I feel that I really something I really wanted to do for a long time, and that I'm relatively playing the same kind of guitar and the same style of music, because it's all based on the blues, you know. So any of that kind of offshoot of the blues, swing or jazz or rock and roll, I mean, it just kind of makes sense to me. I think it started when I first heard the Beatles, because the first two Beatles albums to me, when I was like 6, 7 years old, that's when music started to hit me, you know, real young, and that was my band, you know, and then I remember, you know, my dad came in the room and said something about, started singing along with the Beatles song, and I was like, hey, how do you know this? And then he goes, well, this is a Carl Perkins song, Honey Don't, it's by Carl Perkins. And, you know, I don't know who these guys are, but this is Carl Perkins. And that's when I went and discovered all the original Rockabilly artists, you know, and discovered out who they were, and just went, wow, nobody else knows who these guys are. And that was my first real experience with music. Well, to me, the first couple of Beatles albums and the first couple Stones albums are Rockabilly albums. I mean, that's what those records are, you know, with a little bit of blues thrown in before they started writing their own songs. So that they are Rockabilly records. And what I eventually did was I discovered the original guys. And what drew me to people like Carl Perkins and Eddie Cochran was how raw it was and how great it was. And it kind of spoke right to me, as opposed to the other music of the time, which didn't. And the bands that I'm talking about that didn't speak to me were bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Genesis, and that sort of big pompous rock. I just never associated with it. And when the punk movement came out, I was like, yay, I can relate to something, music with energy and music with some, you know, some balls behind it, which to me Rockabilly had the same sort of feel. This music that I heard growing up in Manhattan was part of my life, and I had seen big bands play on the west side in Greenwich Village. And maybe on Saturday night, I'd go over to CBGB's and see the Ramones or something. But it had that power, that, you know, the equal kind of power that raw rock and roll had. And I just always liked it, and in the back of my mind thought it would be a great idea to give this thing a try. I don't think these things are a big deal in my life. I just go and do what I like. And people go, oh, how could you do this? And to me it's like, well, how can I not? It's just something that I've got to try, and life's too short not to go and try these things. It's a great experience. It's something that I didn't know what I was in for. I mean, besides the musicality of it, I didn't realize, you know, you have to write music for 17 individual guys, and that's a whole new aspect that I learned. I didn't know how the guitar would work with the big band, because I just thought, if this idea is any good, it probably was done before. So, am I missing something? Did someone do this? Will this work? So, when I first started playing with it, it was kind of a hit and miss to see what would and wouldn't work. And I found that when I just let it rock and just let it hang out, it worked. And then when the musicians in the band got used to the idea, okay, here's a rock and roll guy with a loud electric guitar leading us, when that finally came to their realization, the whole thing just gelled. Oh, I'm sure at first they thought I was just this rock guy. I mean, these guys, you know, they don't know who anybody is in the rock world. It's not an insult, you know. They just don't know. So I think at first they were like, well, who's this rock guy? You know, I mean, is this guy any good? Can he really play? Because there's a lot of knowledge that you have to know to hang with a big band. I mean, and that knowledge is in the form of jazz. You know, I had grown up with that, so I know those chords, and I could blast by on those chords pretty well, you know. But I think they were maybe doubting that I could carry it off. And then they really kind of were convinced by the time we got on the road. When we started, we had a great gig here in D.C. By the time we hit Cleveland, it was a band, and they got it. They had to see what it was. And the band just had to keep playing and eventually become what it is now, I feel, you know. And now it's where I want it. I never thought of comparing them because you would never put them together. But they're both about doing your own thing, you know. I mean, jazz has always been about free form and exploring music, you know. The punk thing was in a lot of ways too, you know. It had a lot more, it had a look that went with it, you know. Whereas jazz, I mean, there's not really a jazz look, you know, unless you consider a beret or something and a little goatee or something. So the punk thing had a style and a fashion that went with it. But, you know, it had a lot about rebelling, you know, against society in a lot of ways. And jazz paralleled that, yeah. I don't know. I feel like I've been a rebel musically, but not purposely. I mean, I didn't say, okay, this is going on, and, well, I like this about that and that about that, and I don't sit down and calculate all these little things, and this would be cool if I wore that, if I did that. I just kind of go along with what I want, you know. It doesn't always work, but I don't think I could be happy any other way. And Lord knows I would have been in 10 different bands right now if I would have followed every little trend, you know. I would have started out in a new wave band and then worked myself up to a metal band, which is now a bad word, right? Heavy metal's a bad word now. But I don't know what I'd be doing right now. I just can say that musically, I have to do what I like, you know. And I was infatuated with this, thinking of the great sounds, orchestrations, which people just don't do. There's so much great untapped things you could do with this. And that's what drew me to it. You know, when the Stray Cats first started and we had a stand-up bass, you know, you have to remember that 15 years ago when we started, no one had heard the word rockabilly. And no one had saw a stand-up bass on stage. Probably in 15 years, 20 years, you know. It was really cool to have that out front, you know. And I mean, look at that drummer, you know, he's standing up. And it was all unique. But it was things that worked. It wasn't for the novelty of it. I just thought, in my mind, that's what worked. You know, part of it came from, oh, that drummer's sitting behind the drum set with 5,000 drums and 3,000 cymbals. That's so pretentious. 20-minute drum solos. So in my mind, it worked like, we're going to get a guy to stand up and play 2 drums. It was the antithesis of that, you know. And get a stand-up bass player and get him to slap it like they used to, like Bill Haley's bass player. What happened to that sound? Why did that sound ever disappear? You know, just because it was old and it happened before doesn't mean that you have to throw it away. You know, you can recycle that sound. I mean, that's a great sound. So I try and keep a lot of the old stuff that sounds good, you know, and just make it new. It's the only way I can explain it. I didn't start out the big band, even get signed. I mean, we had just played some gigs, and the only way I could pay the boys is to sell out every show. And it's been pretty much that. And it's just kind of keeping its head above the water, you know, and just kind of happening because people like it. I like to think that I can keep the same style of guitar playing, you know, which is basically me playing my Gretsch guitar, you know. That's me. And I never want to lose that sound or tone. Because when I try something, another guitar, different amp, or do something, I kind of lose my essence. It kind of goes away. And I think that's where I got to ground myself. Different ways where I think I've improved, where I can keep that style, is where the big band is in the jazz field. Because when the big band is playing chords, they're playing chords. If they're playing an E flat minor 7 flat 5, I gotta run over that chord. You know, I can't just play anything over it. So that's where I have to go a little bit in that direction. But I tell you, it still comes down to you're on stage and, you know, some people are in the front row and they're digging it and you're just hanging on a note and holding it, you know, because that's where the soul comes from, you know. You're just kind of feeling the way you play. And a lot of it sometimes could be just one note. You just hold it on it. It's like saying, well, how do you write a song? If there was an answer, luckily, you can get in the mood of playing, and you usually capture it. It's more times than not. 90% of the time, I'm on. Only sometimes I'm not on, I feel. But with like writing a song, that's a whole different thing. Like I wish I could say, at 9:30 I'm going to go take a shower, and that inspires me to write a song. You just don't know. It just has to happen, And so a good performance comes a lot easier than, let's say, coming up with a song idea or something like that for me. I really hadn't known Joe that well, except for the old London days. A couple times we had run into each other, and Joe had gotten back into town last year, I guess. He comes back and forth and between America and England, and he called me up and said, Brian, I've got a 55 Cadillac, and it's not running, and I need to get it fixed. And so I have a 60. I said, well, come on, I'll take you to Mr. General Motors. I'll take you to the guy that can drop the engine out and rebuild it in his driveway and put it back in. So we got it fixed, and we were riding around, and we started talking about cars. And I live out in the desert in Palm Springs, and he came out, and we started driving around. And I said, look, I got an idea for a song. It goes like this. And he couldn't stop thinking about it. And then all of a sudden he gave me some lyrics. And the song got written in like an afternoon. I was like, I think we've got something, because you just can't sit down with anybody and write a song. So we started just writing songs. And we wrote about 6, 7 songs. And it just happened that fast, So I realized that we had a little something there going, and we've continued to kind of keep writing songs in that way. I don't know what they'll get used for, all of them, but we've got them.